Okay, welcome. Can I just ask you before we start anything to flags up? Turn the volume. Now, we're going to change things a little bit because the guest speaker today is Tez, and he's got his speech therapist with us as a guest today. So rather than have it after the formal meeting, we're going to have Tez's address first, and then we'll have the formal meeting afterwards, if that's okay with everybody. Yes. So, Tez, would you like to introduce Susan?
Okay. Lady here, Susan Clare, she's my speech therapist, and she's coming today to assess whether or not I can actually speak. So, welcome to all of you. Today I'm going to talk about the mid-air collision on Wayne Airport, Washington, which is known as DCA, which is as far as pilots are concerned, because that's what they plan by, is the landing there, so I'm going to talk about that, and about why am I talking about it, because I've done 23 years in the Air Force, and most of that was as an air traffic controller, so I have an interest in that type of area. And we use it in a RAF. We use the same procedures as civil air traffic control too. We have now for about 50 years. Before that, we had our own procedures, but that was well before I. So I am familiar with procedures that international type air traffic control tends to be orientated towards, although the American system is a little bit different. And we'll go through that later. And I'll also talk about how we can avoid similar incidents. Now, the two aircraft involved were a Black Hawk Sikorsky UH-60, which is known as the Black Hawk simply, and a Bombardier CRJ 700, which is also just known as the CRJ. You can see from the sizes, neither are aircraft are small, and they're reasonably quick. Although the Black Hawk speed at the time of the crash would have been probably only about 120 knots, which is 2 nautical miles a minute, or thereabouts. Whereas the CRJ was on final approach, so he would have been about 135 knots, just over 2 miles a minute. Because he was fully configured for landing at the time, but down at 45 degrees, with his wheels down a lot. So he was looking at the runway, lining it up for a landing. He wasn't looking for a military aircraft anywhere near. So you can see on this picture here, the ICT is the Wichita Airport, which is what the CRJ left from, going to DCA. As he was approaching Ronald Reagan, he was lined up for landing on runway 01. He was assigned a visual approach, although he would have selected his ILS instrumentation because he does that as practice type of thing, even though his visual didn't need it to make sure he landed. When he got transferred to the tower, the tower asked him if he wouldn't mind landing on runway 33. And he thought straight away and said, yeah, I can do that. So he ended up then turning right off runway 01, final approach 01, turning right to manoeuvre for landing runway 33. Now, the problem with that was that the military aircraft, you see his military aircraft flight was conflicting with runway 33. Because he was a helicopter and operating at low level visually, it was never considered to be a major problem because he could be assigned visual separation to keep clear of the aircraft. And later on, that did happen, although it was clear. The actual helicopter was having some difficulty with this altitude. The pilot in control was a pilot that was undergoing a test flight, and the assessing officer was on the the right-hand side, which is normally where the co-pilot would sit. The assessing officer had 5,000 hours, so he's very experienced. The pilot in control was a female with 500 hours. And although that is a lot less than 5,000, it's still inexperienced. And her check flight at the time was a multi-phase check flight, because there's 3 types of check flights, and one for night vision goggles, one for instrument landing, and one for basically manoeuvres. And this was a multi-phase one, which involved night vision goggles. Now, night vision goggles are great when they're used properly in the environment that they're suited for. You can see this flight here. There's a lot of built-up area. It's in the middle of Washington. You can see the US Capitol is not that far away, and I haven't got a pointer, but anyway, you can see where the US Capitol is. So there's a lot of activity in this airport because of security. You often have helicopters, or military flying around the area, as well as the civil aircraft arriving and departing from Reagan. And the thing is with the flight, that marking on there is the VFR flight designated for the helicopters that treated that area. So it was following that route, but the altitudes were having problems. The pilot was having, say, 200 feet indicated, and the check captain was having 300 feet indicated at the same time. Now, to make matters worse, the radar also had a different altitude that the aircraft was supposed to be at. So there was all that going on. Why the altimeters were different, I cannot for the life of me say, because whenever you have a barometric pressure change, or what they call a QNH change, the captain announces setting the altitude to that QNH on the altimeter setting, and the co-pilot, in this case the check pilot, does the same thing with theirs, because they also have an altitude indicator. So that way they're synced. You have the same level on both, the same QNH. For some reason this wasn't happening. There was a lot said about some of the investigations about the altitude actually being a serious problem. The only problem was it hit the aircraft on final. And altitude was not necessarily part of that as a problem. Where they actually collided, the VFR route is not above 200 feet AGL. On final approach, round about where that track crosses, is normally around about 300 to 350 feet. They actually collided around about 300, 350 feet, and it me, I can't understand why they think 150 feet of separation, if they're doing the right thing, is you don't have to worry about it. They can just do it. But the controllers at the time in the tower were also concerned, and they got the aircraft to report traffic inside. Now, 0846 up to the north of Reagan there, you can see the aircraft reported traffic inside. That's the helicopter. He was told about the CRJ on final approach, and but he was told he was circling for runway 33. That was clear on the CRJ's black box. It was clear on the air traffic controllers recording. It wasn't clear on the black box because the black box jumped in when he said traffic inside the CRJ, jumped in and straight away was saying request visual separation. And then he said traffic side request visual separation. The problem with that is by stepping on that, you didn't overstep air traffic control. It couldn't hear that he's circling for on that 33. So I don't know what he thought he was doing, other than being in the way. As the aircraft proceeded further down on track, at 08:47:39, which is 20 seconds before collision, the air traffic controller became a little bit more nervous again because the blips were going to merge on the radar, and he said, "Do you have the CRJ in sight? Track behind that aircraft." That was clear on the air traffic recording. That was clear on the CRJ's recording. It was not clear again on the Black Hawk. Guess why? Because the Black Hawk jumped in again and stepped on the radio so that they couldn't hear the track behind the part. And he heard you have him inside. Again, the Black Hawk says traffic inside. Now, bear in mind this was night time. There were other aircraft behind. I'm sure he thought that was the aircraft he had in sight, because it clearly wasn't the one he crashed into.
Now, is that night or day?
Night time.
Okay, you got 08. I thought that was AM. Alright, that's all 08, okay.
Yeah. I forget what it is Zulu time, but the aircraft.
Actually, at night, it's very hard to judge differences when it's a little bit darker.
It's even harder with night vision goggles on.
You lose the parallax.
As you can see, that area is filled up. Night vision goggles gets ballooned when you have light. It's very good at seeing in the dark, but if you have a bright light there, you get a big balloon around, so it makes it difficult to see. The other thing is, it's become very difficult to see in your peripheral vision with night vision goggles. So if they had a traffic in sight and wanted the aircraft over here, not being able to see the one over here, which is the one they wanted, they were told.
Does the aircraft have proximity alarms going up?
Yes, the CRJ, normally what they have with proximity alarms is normally deactivated below, I think, about 2,000 feet. Because below 2,000 feet you have things like circuit aircraft, all sorts of things, and they don't want the traffic, fly left, fly right, whatever, going off the background, when they're just doing a landing. So when they're just doing a landing, it's normally deactivated. But the CRJ did have it, but again, the CRJ assumed because they're in a traffic a landing area, it was just, it was the aircraft that took off on 01. That's why he was given 33, and it's probably just, he thought it was just that.
Just for the benefit of those who don't understand the 01 and 33, it's 10 degrees and 330 degrees. Yeah.
Yeah, runway 33 is roughly 330-ish, you know, within about 5 degrees either side, for a magnetic heading. And that's the runway to land on. Whereas runway 01 is 010, 5 degrees either side-ish. Well, if it's 10 degrees, then
There's lots of ones too.
if you have 6 degrees, then it rounds up.
Yeah, it's 10 degrees plus and minus, but. Yeah.
I want no arguments here, please.
That's all right, it's all right.
So if the runway's direction is 016, comes from runway 02. If the runway 015, it comes from runway 01. Now, the CRJ did have a warning, so you think, oh yeah, that's great. Again, it was ignored because of the proximity of other aircraft in the area. It didn't assume that it was a problem. The Black Hawk didn't have that warning activated, so they were flying visually, so they didn't need that sort of advice, they thought. Now, having worked with military a lot, where he first said traffic in sight at 0846, way up near the Memorial Bridge, when he was supposed to be at 200 feet, and he was actually at 300. He said the traffic was in sight. At that time, the CRJ was off the map, about 5 kilometres south of the runway. Now, at night time with night vision goggles, to having sight that, I think would be fairly superhuman. But having worked with military, they'll say traffic in sight sometimes, not all pilots, but some pilots, just to not have air traffic off of them. A former chief of the Defence Force that I worked with one time, he was a knucklehead, as in a fighter pilot. And he was up with council on each side, flying Mirages back then. And he was having some roundabout with that power area, having fighting and stuff with from his crew. And I was asked why I sat down for a while. Their opinion of air traffic controllers is not high. They don't like air traffic controllers because air traffic controllers try to put them in boxes. They just want to be let loose. They don't want any restrictions whatsoever. Because they fly visually a lot, and when they're on instance, it's a different case. But when they're flying visually, they expect that they can see stuff and maneuver around it. They don't need to have traffic control.
Do both planes share maximum lighting when they're down low or not?
The normal
illumination, I know
the normal lighting is quite bright at night time. The left wing will have a red light, the right wing will have a green light, red for port and started for green. And they also have a landing light, which is in the front, and that's lighting up the runway. And both the CRJ certainly had that. I'm not sure if the Black Hawk did or not, but I think it did.
The map all the way does the loop around, almost suggests that they saw something.
Sorry, but because I downloaded this video off YouTube, you can add. But later on, we'll film it.
Travel virgins, that
It
is.
would just almost suggest like they saw something coming, veered off around and then came back.
At 8:47 p.m., an Army Black Hawk helicopter collided with a regional jet in the nation's capital. The crash occurred over the Potomac River near Reagan National Airport, killing 67 people. It's one of the most restricted airspaces in the country, but this particular area has long worried pilots like retired Army officer Daryl Feller.
That's probably the most dangerous spot on all those routes in DC.
So here's everything we know about why that area is so precarious. The 33-mile radius around Washington, D.C. is considered a special flight rules area. Pilots have to have advanced clearance from the FAA to fly here, and aircraft must have altitude encoding transponders, among other things. Within that, there's a 17-mile flight restricted zone around Reagan Airport, with even stricter rules. And then there are prohibited areas around the White House, National Mall, and the Vice President's residence. But even with the restrictions, it's still one of the most congested airspaces in the country, with civilian, military, police, and other government aircraft constantly operating. To help manage this, DC has designated helicopter corridors, as well as altitude restrictions to keep everyone safe. So what happened during the crash? Flight data shows the Black Hawk helicopter flying south down a helicopter corridor over the Potomac River. Military officials say the pilots were experienced and were conducting an annual night training mission known as a check ride. Meanwhile, American Airlines Flight 5342 is traveling north toward Reagan National. It was originally supposed to land on runway 1, with a flight path that goes up the river. But at approximately 8:42 p.m., minutes before landing, the jet was told to use a different, shorter runway.
Okay, runway 33. Yeah, we can do 33, so 6347. Thanks for runway 33, runway 33,
Runway changes aren't unusual, but it meant the plane had to bow right before turning sharply left and cutting across the helicopter corridor. A move that pilots say makes the jet hard for helicopters to see, especially at a low altitude.
Confusion with ground lights is what it's called. When you're flying south, and you get just to the east of the airport, off to the left is southeast DC. And so there's a lot of city lights, street lights, I-295 is over there, so there's a lot of vehicle lights. What happens is low-flying aircraft will get lost in the background of all those city lights. You can't see them if they're moving towards you, away from you, or you can't see them at all.
There are also questions about staffing of air traffic control that night and whether more people should have been working. Another potential problem was altitude. Helicopters are supposed to fly below 200 feet in this part of the corridor, but flight data shows the helicopter may have risen above 300 feet as the airplane was descending from 400 feet. Officials say data from the aircraft's recording device still needs to be investigated to confirm, but Feller says even if altitude was a factor, something else likely went wrong before that.
A professional Army aviator is not going to fly within 100 feet of a passenger jet. It's just not going to do that. I would suspect he didn't see the jet.
During a press briefing, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said this.
There was some sort of an elevation issue that we have immediately begun investigating at the DoD and Army level. Army CID is on the ground investigating. Top-tier aviation assets inside the DoD are investigating, sir, to get to the bottom of it so that it does not happen again, because it's absolutely unacceptable.
After the crash, the FAA announced it would restrict helicopter traffic in the area where the Black Hawk was traveling.
They raised, I'll just leave it on there for a moment. They raised a few issues. One about the meaning of the air traffic control. The air traffic tower reduced to two men or manning tower at a time. That's not unusual in air traffic control at night time. At night time, traffic tends to get less than it does during the daytime. So a supervisor, who just makes up the third person, will often say to someone out of the other two, I need to go home, I'll take over. So that's a very normal thing, because unless you have a really busy session, you're not, where you're not going to do that. If it's going to be quiet, no problem, yeah, go home. This particular incident, believe it or not, is not a busy situation, it's quite quiet. They had a small aircraft, jet lined up on 01, which is wider after we can take runway 33. They asked him to take 33, then they lined up to 01, cleared him to take off. So that one was taking off. So the air traffic controller was looking at that aircraft. They want to make sure that that aircraft passes the intersection of 33 because of the aircraft profile, and otherwise they have a conflict if they're both one taking off, one landing, one crossing on. So that was what they're probably visually looking at the time, and they did notice the Blackhawk on the tower's radar. Out the window, they would have seen the light as well from the helicopter. And again, with distance, looking out the tower is not a great thing, whereas the radar is perfect, and that's where they ask confirmed insight, that sort of stuff. So those sorts of actions aren't unusual, and it's not a busy sequence. So certainly reducing the two men or two people in the tower was not the problem at all. The other thing Hegseth was going on about was we're investigating altitude. I mentioned that how the altitude was different on the altimeters and the radars and all the rest of it. And the actual VFR route does have restrictions on it about what altitude she should be at. This aircraft wasn't at those levels, and why? I can't say, because I don't know why the altitude was different from the pilot to the check captain, and I don't know why the radar was also different, and I don't know why the pilot control even saw their altitude being too high, didn't immediately go down. I can't say. Other than as a military pilot, they thought they were indestructible and could always separate themselves visually. That's a military thing from a pilot perspective, not an air traffic control. Now, would this happen in Australia's airspace? Well, back in 1990, the Prime Minister Bob Hawke assigned Dick Smith to be the chairman of the Civil Aviation Authority, as it was called then. Now, Dick had a lot of great ideas in his mind. I don't think they were great ideas. Air traffic control was in Australia at the time was very, very safe. The ideas he had were American born in terms of the way they operate. So he introduced a system in Australia where we changed the designations of airspace to a bigger type. Our A, B, C, D, E, F, G was the names of the airspace, but the procedures in each of those was different, and it relied a lot on the pilot visually separating. Obviously, in good conditions where you can do that, and basically that system is part of the problem that they had in the Reagan Airport crash. Because the pilot said, request visual separation, traffic's in sight, air traffic control is always going to say, maintain your own separation, go for it. Because otherwise, you just make yourself work harder when you know you don't have to, because the aircraft can see the traffic and it's just not hitting. The problem with that is that in Australia, we're not as busy as America can be. In fact, a lot of countries have much busier airports than we do. So from that perspective, I'm probably speaking as a quiet air traffic controller that controls in a much quieter airspace. So shooting. But basically, the busy system, you do not want to let procedures override safety. So if you have a VFR route that completes the final approach from runway 33, you've got to have set procedures to make sure that that never completes. They didn't. That flight was going underneath, and because it wasn't at the altitude it was supposed to be, it collided. If it was at the altitude, it would have missed, but only by 150 feet. For Christ's sake, that's not separation. Like if, for instance, the CRJ is a large-ish aircraft, medium aircraft. Bigger aircraft have something called wake turbulence. And if you fly within 150 feet of that, you're probably going to be flipped around because of the wake turbulence situation. So separation standards, if below 10,000, sorry, below 20,000 feet in Australia is 1,000 feet. 30. Above that it's nuclear. And that's simple because the barometric pressure gives you less altitude difference, actual altitude difference, even though your indication is might be a certain level that's 2,000 feet separated. Your actual separation might only be down towards the south.
Here's the third bottom one. All parties to utilise the same radio frequency. I thought that could cause a problem if not just one person talking and another one and a third person. It's that third person that...
Part of the problem in America, and this may have been why the Black Hawk was stepping on the radio a lot. Military aircraft in America operate on a UHF frequency. Civil aircraft operate on a VHF frequency. In Australia, that's the same thing, except in Australia, in approach zones and tower zones, you have retransmission, where if somebody talks to you, on a military aircraft, it's retransmitted on a VHF frequency, so civil people can hear it. In America, that's not the case. So the Black Hawk can talk their head off, and the CRJ will not hear a word, and vice versa.
Did either of the pilots or aircraft attempt avoidance? The Black Hawk, no. Black Hawk did not see and just crashed. Something like, I think it might have been 5 seconds before collision, according to the black box, the altitude of the CRJ on the final normally would be configured for landing, but it actually had nose up 5 degrees and a slight turn, which indicates that the pilot at the last second saw his thing and thought, no, I'm out of here and I'm too late.
Watching your flight path down, it's almost a Black Hawk, it turned, it was coming down, and then the jet turned so it could go across the runway 33. And then the Black Hawk turned as if to say, oh, it's almost like he'd seen it and thought, I better turn, otherwise we're going to collide. And then the jet turned left and then they banged him.
You're talking about the route there?
Yeah, here. Yeah. When they were coming down, they showed you, because this one did a veer around, it didn't go like that. It was coming up and he was coming this way, and then this one turned, and then this one turned and went that way.
Yeah.
And so as if he was trying to miss it, but then this one turned and went back this way and bang. That's what I've seen show on that video.
The actual VFR route continues down the river, so pretty much Black Hawk had no idea about the CRJ, none whatsoever.
As you mentioned the night vision goggles, I mean, that's there's been so many instances with collisions, particularly with Black Hawk and night vision goggles. There hasn't been a great deal of discussion about that in this incident, whereas in Australia, we've had 2 recent ones where we've lost Black Hawks and the crew with night vision goggles. Was there anything much come out of it about that, or are they just trying to bury that?
The investigation into it by the they take roughly 12 months to complete a full report.
Yeah.
So they cover everything. And so all we have at the moment is people's opinions, nothing more than that.
To Joe Biden, Donald Trump had all this worked out within an hour.
Did
It
it?
wasn't the air traffic controllers, it wasn't the pilot's fault, it was Joe Biden.
We're going to change the airport to Trump crash though.
The business of that airport, you're going to have situations similar that occur every now and then. And especially if they decide to use night vision goggles on a VFR route in the middle of a restricted zone around Reagan Airport. Because as you saw, the lights,
It's not like this. I mean, I lived there 3 years. I think I flew in that airport probably 50 times, and mostly at night, because you usually leave early in the morning and come back at night. And it's not like the 4th of July, and there's aircraft everywhere. I don't know, I always, chew my tongue every time we sort of talk off the land of this. There's just aircraft everywhere there. I really don't know how they manage it. It's a nightmare.
Well, again, part of their system is to manage it by relying on the aircraft.
But here's what, I seem to recall, I also lived in that vicinity for a year, back a long time ago. And there was an aircraft that crashed into the tarmac that hit the 40th Street Bridge.
Oh, yeah.
I was there then.
The jet line, a lot of big ones, the Vice River.
Yeah, it was, I mean, when I was there, they changed the rules so that you couldn't have long distance flights, that were trying to keep the amount of traffic down. So they said only short distance flights, and the airlines were actually doing touch and go at Washington, the big airport just over in Virginia, touching down so that technically they were a short distance flight. I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
There's so many policies.
As far as this is concerned, I think the CRJ crew have no blame whatsoever. Even if they departed from Sydney, they've got no blame for what occurred. But I understand how some concerns might be about concentration for aircrew over a long distance, but generally speaking, the system they have can cater for that. If you're on a long distance flight, you usually got at least 2 sets of pilots in the which one's sleeping, one's flying over a long distance.
The other thing I just brought to mind too was you could get cheap flights out of National Airport. They were, get the airline out, we'll come to it in a minute, but they didn't have a schedule. There wasn't a schedule that, you couldn't look online and say, was it going to leave 16:40 or whatever. You turned up and you bought a ticket. And then you sat in the waiting room, and then what they would do, they would schedule the flights in between other flights taking off land. So they would sit there and wait, then they'd say, all right, boarding, and then you might be sitting in the plane for 10, 15, 20 minutes, not going to go. So they were cheap tickets. You got a little brown paper bag as you got on the plane with your drink of an orange in it or something. And they were just gap fillers in all the scheduled flights. And there were quite a few of those dropping out. So this is all the time.
What year are we talking about? Oh, the 80s, okay. Fair enough. Tes, I just noticed those planes at 90 degrees, that's probably one of the hardest angles to monitor because you've got to, if it was coming towards it, it would have a better chance of avoiding it.
An interesting fact that a lot of,
I think the lady is at the lead.
an interesting fact that's not considered by a lot of people is that, when you have two aircraft on a conflicting flight route, where they're going to crash, they're harder to see, because as they get closer and closer, that light that you see of that aircraft does not move relative to you. So you can't tell, whereas if they're gonna miss, you can see, oh, that's a moving aircraft. I can see that.
Yes.
Whereas it just looks like a light that's not moving when they're going to fly. So two aircraft on a collision course are always gonna rely, I hope, on firm advice from air traffic control. Now, I think the other thing in Australia, readbacks for instructions for air traffic control is very strict. It seems that they didn't rely on the pilot reading back track behind the CRJ or track behind the aircraft. They just assumed when they said traffic sign, that was all they had to worry about. Whereas in Australia, if you give an instruction for an aircraft, you're required for them to read it back.
Terry, not that it's, I just want to raise two questions, not about that particular crash. SeaWorld, two helicopters, Taipan, North Queensland Army. Have you got any comments on either of those two crashes?
I'm not
accidents?
familiar with those two,
Oh.
but you know, if I have a look at it, I think.
I was just thinking of the SeaWorld one, your comment about they're on a collision course and one doesn't look like it's moving, and I think that would be very pertinent on that SeaWorld. Two helicopters crashing.
David, just with that SeaWorld one, from what I gathered, those two are doing those routes day in, day out.
Yes.
Perhaps they came a bit blasé, that it's like you driving to school to work every day, you don't even think what you're doing, except for one day.
Yes.
One of them had a defective radio.
That's right.
A defective-
But was that, if it was or wasn't, would that have still caused it? I'm not sure.
Well, he wasn't getting the advice that the other helicopter was taking.
Controlled a lot of aircraft in my career. I loved it because you could tell them to stop. And whereas civil aircraft, the best you can do is get them to either speed up or slow down, or change heading or change altitude. Whereas you can do all that with a helicopter as well as stop. That makes it a lot safer.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Is there any more questions?
Just the final one.
Yes.
Why are you wearing a roller scarf?
I thought this might come up, and those that have been here in the shed for a long time will know every Wednesday as far as I wear it. I don't care who wins, obviously, as long as it's a very good game.
Yes.
And that's the main thing. And State of Origin, 99% of the time is a good game. When it's a white light, I don't care who wins, I don't like the game.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Barry.
Okay, thanks, Terry. So we're going to present a normal meeting are there any prizes? Bruce, could be around for that, huh?
Martin Lack gave me his apology.
Johnny, are there any welfare issues?
No, everybody's healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Jill's not here today, so there's no president's report. Secretary's report, we'll put a different hat on. The only thing I'll mention is that you would have all received the notification for the special general meeting in a fortnight's time. There are explanatory notes, etc., etc. So, are there any questions about it at this stage, or everybody happy? Good. report.
Yeah, nothing new to report, Chairman. Money coming in, money going out.
Any feedback on the event last weekend in terms of return to the shed?
Yeah, we, spoke to Sarah about that. The way it will work is, Mines will pay for the catering, that's what we, can use. All the money we receive will go to Lions, and Marathon Committee will give Shed a donation, like they do for Lions officers. So we made about $700 and something on the day. That money will go to Lions. And they'll donate X amount, I'm not sure how much it will be. So we will, the shed will receive something for the effort that we put in, which is pretty good, big effort actually. So that's how it works. What mines, we do the work, they give us a donation. Sorry, not mines, the pipe rock. So, apart from that, nothing.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Dennis is not here today, so John, have you got anything you'd like to say?
So last week we went through a number of shelves and with the idea of reducing the providing more shelf space by pulling out some books that otherwise don't get referred to very frequently, and I've got 3 large bags of books that I'll be taking to St. Penny's in the next couple of days.
Okay. Thanks, John. Please, Steve.
Well, I remember, those 2 things on the desk there are wipes for my CPAP machine to keep it clean. They resupply me regularly, but often too much of those. So if anyone needs those or would like to use those, there you go.
They're wipes, they're wet wipes.
So work report groups, Charlie, can you give a little bit?
Things are back to the metalwork shed, and John's doing a great job converting a horizontal, a vertical vent to a horizontal one, so we've had a horizontal vent.
On the way around.
They convert it back.
Converting horizontal to vertical, that's new. But he's using the milling machine that we got from Ipswich, which again he's done a lot of refurbishing on, and that's all going well.
The guy I'll put on a different hat, woodshed.
Sorry,
Yeah, I just, I put some about 8 metre lengths of inch by inch, I don't
it's quite a high section.
know, metal, and I've got them out the front of my place, and if there's a lot of it's rusty, but if you can, you know, it's you can have it if it's worthwhile. Otherwise, I'm going to get it skipped to put it in.
How long are the pieces?
About 8 metres.
8 metres?
Well, I don't know, how wide is this?
Yeah, it might be 8 metres.
It's about
Or 6, it might
a
be
bit
6.
less than this, but yeah,
6
they're
is
long.
standard.
Might be doing a problem for the issue.
Yeah, we can cut it, they can cut that.
Yeah,
They
we
can
cut
cut
it
it
down.
down visible lengths.
Could be
That's the length of the steel, usually. It's 6 metre length, it's standard.
8 metres is a long piece of metal.
Have a look at it. What section is it? Walk your dog round our way, Charlie. Walk your dog round our way, and you won't miss it.
I was just about to say with the woodshed group, with
It's inch
with,
by, it's just,
increased
it's
the violin case racks. We've completed the end section, so we've still got a little bit to do, but as we can see, the end of the project is in sight. Which is certificate complete. Leather green.
Yeah, we're also working on that, Paul, and we're also working, I think, it's working with the government.
Oh, yes, sorry,
So, can I just say, just so that people are aware, the Brisbane River Golf Club, which is Grandad's Golf Club, very late notice, they like to participate in a charity golf day next Saturday. We declined because we got the Bunyal sausages launched Saturday, so it would have been a bit difficult. There's been further discussion, it sort of came out that, in fact, what they really were going to do was make their charity golf day, make us the beneficiary of the charity golf day. And so they've asked us to, which would be great, we should get a few dollars from that. So we have to together refurbish some golf clubs and make a presentation case to mount the golf clubs in, which is underway. So that should return, you know, somewhere, I don't know, $800 to $1,500 to where it left it. Thank you.
thanks, Stuart. Beekeeping group,
Yeah, I'll speak to that. Yeah, I've been sort of laying on horizontal plane for a little while, and so yeah, I've been reading about all the beekeeping, working really well. Apart from that, I'd like to hats off to Bill and Jack, who actually came over to my place and helped get my hives ready for for winter. Yeah, it was really good of them, and we will go.
alright, thanks, Stuart. And Bruce, I think you
Yeah,
were going
that'll be up tomorrow, if anyone